Eric, great to have you here over in Europe. I know you're here a lot.
Yes.
I don't think there's one startup out there actually that wouldn't like to emulate in some way Alphabet's rise. You're frowning already.
No. Go ahead.
But when I ask people about Alphabet, they go, "Oh, you mean Google? Something that categorizes the internet, key focus advertising." What do you want them to think when they see Alphabet?
Well, of course, Google is this fantastic company that everybody here uses, and of course its letter is G. What we did when we created Alphabet as the parent company is we created a place where we could create other companies, which would have different letters, of course, A through Z. And of course, the CEOs of these companies are called characters, as in the alphabet. So we have a whole bunch of them. The most interesting ones recently are DeepMind, which of course is our AI work, and King's Cross, and then a life sciences company called Verily, with others coming.
Let's fast forward 5 years. What's your revenue stream? Advertising, cloud services, AI, some kind of human learning, virtual reality? What dominates?
Well, I've been at Google and Alphabet now for 15 years, and it's always been advertising. And I suspect it will always be advertising, because advertising is such a large part of the global phenomena, and because our advertising is more accurate, that is a return on investment, more precise advertising. And I think that what we'll do is our tools will get better and better at getting the right ad for you in the right place in these new architectures. And we're obviously going to have growth in these other areas. But the advertising space is so large, and our advertising system, if I may brag, is so good in terms of delivering the right ad that I think it'll remain so.
So talk to me about artificial intelligence, because in your conference last week, this was a real buzzword. I know a number of headlines saying you're doubling down on AI. How do you monetize it? Well,
in our case, we already use it a little bit, because the machine learning systems that we build are trained against, for example, advertising.
Yeah.
So our advertising systems use earlier versions of what is the right ad for this scenario. And because Google is essentially a large amount of data, it's also a large amount of training data. And a little bit of the language for everybody in the room, if you're not familiar with it, the AI and machine learning systems work when you have an awful lot of training data, so you can say, this is what you do here, this is what you do there. And if there's relatively sparse data, the systems are not able to learn. And we have lots and lots of clicks and ads and people doing things on their phones and in apps and on YouTube that we can use to train to produce better services. And that's why we keep talking about this, and why at the Google I/O conference, it was such a feature of everything we did.
We just assume at this moment, I think, that artificial intelligence is a positive for society. But at what point do you think the regulators step in here and go, hang on a second, how is this being used, and how is data and information being collected? You know a thing or two about regulators, particularly here in Europe.
Well, there's two different questions there. The AI and machine learning work that's being done in the industry, not just at Google, although I'd argue we're certainly one of the leaders, is not anywhere near what you see in the movies. So I constantly encounter people saying, well, when will HAL take over, referring to the movie? And I say, well, how many movies have you seen of this kind? And the answer is for their whole lives. And we're not at the point, and we're not likely to point anytime soon, where those kinds of issues would even arise, let alone require regulation. There are certainly concerns among governments today about data retention, data policy, and so forth and so on, and we work hard on that. But we're a long way from those issues, I think.
Define a long way.
Oh, a decade or more. A long time, not 1 or 2 years.
That's not long.
In our world, that's infinitely long.
But it's not long if you're talking about...
Well, in our world, it's a long time.
Yeah, it's infinite, I get it.
In our world, a lot of things can happen in 10 years. If you think about, just as an aside, 10 years ago when we started pushing for entrepreneurship in Europe in particular, there were essentially no startups to speak of. And today we have significant billion-dollar corporations here in Europe. We have quite the momentum. We have this conference as an example. There are lots of areas where we and other companies have invested significantly in trying to help create this ecosystem. The app ecosystem itself creates opportunities for each and every one of you, independent of us. Yeah. There's just a long list of things that have changed in a decade, and it will be true for the next 10 as well.
You've opened up your intellectual property on AI. I mean, Tesla's done similar with their technology and understanding. What's the logic here? What's the economics?
Well, part of our job is to seed markets with new ideas. And the quickest way to do that is to build software which is called open source, where you literally freely license it. We built a library called TensorFlow. And without getting too much into the technology behind it, the machine learning algorithms that we're talking about are essentially matrix multiplication, and multidimensional matrices are called tensors. So TensorFlow is a library that allows you to take these matrices and manipulate them. And in addition to TensorFlow, we've also introduced some simple libraries so that you can see how these vision recognition and other kinds of models would work. We're trying to seed the market. We believe that not only will we be using TensorFlow as the basis of our products, but all of our competitors will and all the new startups. And on balance, that's a win, because we win when the whole ecosystem gets larger. There's more knowledge, there's more sharing. It's always been true in tech. People have this sort of simple book model of us versus them. But part of the reason that Silicon Valley has been so successful is that there is a broad array of collaboration at the technological level, which has lifted the infrastructure up, whether it's at the networking level or the platform level or the language level, and that needs to continue.
So use that example in the court case. We're waiting for a verdict today between yourselves and Oracle, and the ongoing dispute that we've seen here with Java. What happens if you lose today?
Well, of course, we're part of the open source movement, so I think it really hurts Oracle because they own Java and they need to promote it into this new world. And it just doesn't make sense to me that they're in that path.
But what about for startups who've tried to make their products compliant? Aren't we opening a whole host of potential lawsuits?
There is now an open source version of all of this, which they can use, and I would recommend that.
Alphabet's got huge resources, talent, great tech. Why have you struggled in social?
Well, we've been doing other things to start with, and the things that we've done they haven't been exactly targeted in the way people think they are. So we try to build identity management systems which we can then use to make our other services better. We have a slightly different objective. We'll see how this next generation works.
So explain Allo and Duo to me, because a lot of people out there are saying, why do we now have 4 chat products? Where's that centralized plan to tackle Facebook?
Well, perhaps because Allo is better than anything else on the market. It was announced this week.
I know.
Before we sort of criticize it, why don't you use it? That's sort of my attitude. The product is quite good. What's interesting about Allo is that it uses our machine learning to be smarter. And so I spend all day saying, why don't we just take products and add intelligence and make humans smarter? Right? If you just sort of say that as your goal throughout the entire product line. And again, this is the opportunity for machine learning. So in Allo's case, it's just come out. Let's use it for a while and see if it really does deliver particularly good. It has a system which helps you answer questions and understands what's going on. It's never been done before in the messaging space.
Okay, guys, get involved. Put your hand up if you use Instagram, Skype, WhatsApp, iMessage. Okay? So keep your hands up. Put your hand down if you'd be willing to switch to something that's maybe a bit superior, or you're stuck using what you're using. Do you like what you're using? Interesting.
So
there's potential.
Yes, it turns out if you make a better product, people switch to it. It's a shock, right? By the way, I think every person in this room actually believes that their product that they're building is better than the current ones. Otherwise, they wouldn't be building their startup.
There has to be a mentality of that. You have to continue to innovate.
It's called being an entrepreneur.
How many new ideas really are there? Or are they not just a new idea of an idea of an idea?
If I follow the line of reasoning, there are no new ideas. Go home. By the way, that was a joke.
They're an adaptation.
Okay, so let's just review again the truth of the world.
Yeah.
There are a gazillion new ideas in each and anybody's heads. We have a model for entrepreneurship. This market is the most open market that there's ever been. What the internet has done is it has given voices to people who could never be heard before. They could never actually not only be successful, but be heard at all. Right? So the thing that I'm proudest of is that the connectivity of the world, and especially of the developing world, has given these people voices, not just for information, but also for their creativity and now for apps and so forth. The fact of the matter is, I'll pick an example. Look at WeChat in China. Who would have thought that Chinese, we always decry their software and so forth and so on, they produced a very effective product for the Chinese market. It's doing very well. It has more than 600 million users. So my point here is that if you look at it, it is possible in every generation of young people, young entrepreneurs and so forth, believes they can do it, and some pull it off. And give you another shock. We have here represented on the stage Apple, Google Alphabet, Uber, and others. There's going to be more. In fact, there's going to be more and more because of scaling and the scale of the world. And that's why it's so exciting to be here.
I love that you mentioned China there. How does Alphabet improve its relationship with China? Is it still a plan, an option?
We're working on it. I think our role in China is largely determined not by us, but by what the Chinese government will allow. We left China in 2010 because we were uncomfortable with their laws, which have not gotten better since we left.
So if we look at the time since you've been away, we've gone from 50 million mobile users to 750 million.
Yeah.
And the Chinese consumer is quite specific. They seem to know exactly what they want. I mean, we look at chats, Tencent's years ahead of us.
What my Chinese friends say is that what they want is Google. That our competitor, and indeed we still operate in China, but we operate under these restrictions, which make it very difficult to use Google search, which is sort of a whole disaster. But people are heavily criticizing Baidu now. You can read about this in the Chinese press, and perhaps that's an opportunity. We'll see. But it's completely determined not by us, but by the Chinese government.
Can you envisage a situation where consumers turn the government? The demand.
There is always hope.
But it's small.
There's always hope.